Hi, this is Mrs. Kidman, and in this video, that is not the right page. In this video, we are going to be discussing how we multiply radicals. So when we are multiplying radicals, what we're going to do is we're going to follow three simple steps. Step number one is that we are going to multiply. Step number one is to multiply those numbers on the outside. So let's see if our pen will work here. We want to multiply our outside numbers or our coefficients there. So multiply the outside numbers. The second thing we want to do is we want to multiply any numbers that are on the inside. Remember, those inside numbers are called the radicand. And then the last thing we want to do is we want to simplify it. So by following these three steps, we can multiply these. Now in this video, we're going to talk about how to multiply simple ones. We're going to talk about how to use the distributive property, and we're also going to talk about how we might have to FOIL when we are multiplying. So let's start with the basics, just multiplying two radicals. So multiply the outsides. These first two have no numbers on the outside or 1, so 1 times 1 is 1. Great. Multiply the numbers on the inside. Square root of 3, or 3 times 5 is 15. Now we can tell whether or not something simplifies by looking at the numbers before. Do you see how 3 and 5 are both prime numbers? If they're both prime, then this square root of 15 is as simple as it gets. If for some reason they weren't both prime, then there might be a factor that we can factor out, and we want to look into that. So now let's take a look at number 2. Multiplying our outside numbers, 2 times 5 is 10. And then we've got the square root of 7 times 11, which is 77. Now again, to simplify, 7 and 11 are both prime numbers. So if they're both prime, that means that 77 is as simple as it's going to get. Great. Now let's take a look at this next one. Let's multiply our outside numbers, which is 1. Our inside number, 6 times 15, is the square root of 90. Now 6 and 15 here, those two are not prime. Those are both composite numbers. So that means this 90 can probably factor. And we can factor it out into 3 and 30, and 30 factors into 3 and 10 factors into 2 and 5. So we can see that 3 is a common factor between those two. And we know that 6 is 3 and 2, and 15 is 3 and 5. They both have a factor of 3, so we know we can factor out 3. And so ultimately, this is actually 3 root 10. And that's a lot simpler than the root of 90. So on this last one, we're going to do the exact same thing. Multiply the outside, 2 times 7, which is 14. Multiply the insides, 10 times 14 is 140. Neither of them are prime. They're both composite. So let's break it down. I've got 2 and 70. 70 breaks down into 2 and 35. 35 breaks down into 5 and 7. So that 2 we can factor out. We already have a 14 on the outside, so we need to take that 2 and multiply it by 14. So we end up getting 28 on the outside and 35 on the inside. And so the square 2 times root 10 times 7 times the square root of 14 is 28 times the square root of 35. Fantastic. Okay, so we can apply these same rules when we want to distribute it. So sometimes we have to multiply by distributing. All we're going to do is do just like our regular distributing is, but we're going to follow the rules of multiplying radicals. So root 3 times root 5 is root 15. Root 3 times 2 root 3 is 2 plus root 3. Now notice how we have a plus sign here. Once I get my plus sign, part of that simplifying is checking to see if both of these numbers can combine together. Now 15 is built from 2 primes, so it doesn't simplify anymore. And 3, well, that's prime, so it doesn't simplify anymore. So this is actually as simple as we're going to get there. Now let's take a look at this next one. It's going to be the same sort of thing. Root 3 times the square root of 5 is square root of 15. The square root of 3 times the square root of 2 is plus square root 6. Now in the previous problem, we did notice that 15 and 6, when we multiply those, it can be simplified. But here we're adding, and 15 and 6 do not have we can't simplify them anymore because they're both based off of prime numbers. Therefore, that's as simple as that one's going to get. Now let's look at our last one here. Following that exact same pattern, we're going to multiply 5 times 2, and that'll give us 10 root 77, and 5 root 7 times negative 6 root 5 gives us negative 30 times the root of 35. Now again, looking at our numbers, 7, 11, and 5 are all prime, so none of these can simplify, and this is where we're left. Now, we can multiply them. We can distribute them. We can also FOIL them. So sometimes we're going to be multiplying things that can't be combined. We're going to be multiplying these sets together. And when we multiply these sets together, we need to use our FOIL method. So that means FOIL, again, remember that stands for first, outside, inside, and last. So we want to use those to multiply these out. So root 3 times root 11 is root 33. Root 3 times negative 4 is negative 4 root 3. 7 times root 11 is 7 root 11. And 7 times negative 4 is negative 28. Now, I want you guys to look here. 3 and 11 are prime, so this is what it is. This can't be simplified anymore because 3 is prime. This can't be simplified anymore because 11 is prime, and this is just a number. So this right here is actually what that's going to be. Nothing else can combine there. Now, I want to look at another problem that's over here, and it's going to be very similar, but I'm going to kind of change this one up. So instead of having that problem, what I want to look at is 2 root 3 plus root 7 times 4 root 3 minus 2 root 7. So notice how these are both root 3s and root 7s. That's going to play a special part here when it comes to combining terms. So let's go ahead and FOIL this just the same way. I multiply these two and I get 8 root 9. I multiply these two and I get minus 4 times the square root of 21. We multiply these two and we get plus 4 times the square root of 21. Right? Yeah. And then we end up getting right here, negative 2 root 7 times root 7 is negative 2 times the square root of 49. Now let's talk about these square roots and see if they simplify. Well, this one right here, the square root of 9, that's 3. So really I've got 8 times 3. 8 times 3. Well, that's not pretty. 8 times 3 minus 4 times root 21. Root 21 won't simplify. Plus 4 times root 21. Okay. And then the square root of 49, well, that's just 7. So now let's combine these. 8 times 3 is 24. Negative 4 root 7, or negative 4 root 21 plus 4 root 21, well, those just cancel. And then I've got negative 2 times 7, which is 14. So this actually equals 10. So sometimes we're going to get something crazy complicated like this one. Sometimes we want to FOIL because we find out that when I multiply these, I actually just get the number 10. And that's way prettier than having all these radicals. So make sure that you FOIL it out and simplify it all the way, because sometimes that number that we get is going to be a lot prettier than what we had before. So remember, when you're multiplying, multiply the outside numbers first, multiply the inside numbers or the radicand, and then simplify it as much as you can. Combine like terms, simplify the radical, things like that, so that we can have that most simple product of two radicals.